So, welcome everybody. Our talk tonight is Get Out of Your Drama. I'm Michael Dalton from Bioenergy Healing, and we're going to unravel tonight what that means to get out of your drama. I sometimes think of the drama as the mind, the ego, our wounds, our past stories. And after working with Bioenergy Healing for 30 years, I've had the opportunity to help a lot of people get out of their drama, get out of their stories, get out of their wounds, get out of their ego, and help people unravel that. And so our talk tonight is to give some insights and some tips. Maybe you can take something away that can help you unravel and open and heal just a little bit more I think of it like an onion, right? Like an onion has all these layers, and we're multi-layered, we're multifaceted, we're multi-dimensional. And it's like we just peel away the layers and we unravel ourselves and heal ourselves a little bit more each day, a little bit more each week, a little bit more each month, a little bit more each year. We unravel and we heal. And these webinars are really just coming together and creating an environment for people to learn and grow and heal. And it's a frequency, it's an energy, it's a vibe. And so I hope tonight you can just relax back and just breathe in, just stay with the breath and just feel the vibration of the words and the communication that I'm sharing with you here tonight. When it comes to vibration, everything is energy, frequency, vibration. Everything moves in waves, patterns, rhythms, and cycles. And we tend to kind of like vibrate and resonate back into the same environments over and over with the same people over and over. And indeed, sometimes our own stories, conditioning, programming, wounding, they get repeated over and over. And I've always thought like healing is really helping people come off the automatic pilot, right? That we can be living on an autopilot, going through life on autopilot. You know, sometimes you do something and someone says, "Hey, why'd you do that?" And you weren't even thinking about it. You were just doing it on autopilot. And I think we've all had those experiences where we've driven somewhere, we get there, and then we think, I don't even remember driving. You know, it's like you were driving unconsciously. And there's a reason for that, is because a lot of times when you're driving, once you're in the process of driving, you're driving most of your trip 90% unconscious, right? So you're free to do other things because it's in your muscle memory. You know how to drive. You don't need to think about it. You don't even need to focus too much on what you're doing, you know, unless it's raining or something and it pulls your attention. But we tend to just go into automatic pilot. And that's not just for driving. We go into automatic pilot in conversations, right? You think of someone who's in your life, whether it's a husband, a wife, a partner, a friend, a brother, a sister, a sibling, a parent, you know, and you tend to have very similar conversations with the same people. But not even just like what you're speaking about, but the way that you speak to each other. So you might speak very differently to your mother or your father than you do with your partner. You might speak very different to your partner than you do with your children. You might speak very different to them than you do with work colleagues, than you do with friends. So we tend to kind of like vibrate into different frequencies with different people, but we tend to repeat the same patterns over and over. And a lot of the patterns that we repeat, as I said, they can be on this autopilot where we may not even realize that we're just repeating the same patterns over and over. So one of the things about bioenergy healing that I've worked with helping people is a lot of times when it comes to illness or sickness, people tend to be caught in past memories of stuff. They tend to be caught in things that have happened to them. And maybe rightly so, right? Like something happens and you're angry towards it, and rightly so, you're angry because something bad happened to you, right? But it's like 3 years later, 5 years later, 10 years later, 20 years later, if you're still angry about that, it's no longer the situation. Now it's you, right? Like there's a point in which there's this situation which you're right to be angry at, And then 10 years later, now it's your drama. It's no longer the situation. Now you're in a drama with yourself, right? Like now you're, you know, I often show it to people like in workshops. It's kind of like, you pick up a chair and you carry a chair around and you hand the chair to someone and someone will take the chair and they'll hold it, and they'll wait until you give them permission to put it down. But, in essence, you can put the chair down anytime you want, right? Like you don't have to take the chair and you can put it down anytime you want. But sometimes people will take the chair in the workshop and they'll just hold on to it. And they're like, well, you didn't tell me to put it down. I'm not sure what I'm supposed to do. And we're kind of like that with life sometimes, that life gives us stuff and we're not sure what to do with it. And so we hold on to it. And when we hold on to pressures and stresses, and especially if we experience it as trauma, and we hold on to these things, and over time they turn into illness and sickness in the body. Right. And then despite our best efforts and best attempts, we tend to be like, even the way we treat them, we often treat like even in our healing approach, it's sometimes just repeating a lot of the same stuff that we've already done. So even that can be unconscious. Even the approach of healing can be unconscious, as much as the repeating the same pattern can be unconscious, or indeed an auto response. So in terms of healing, it's like, I think of like getting out of your drama is like unraveling the mind. It's like there's three parts to healing. So there's the working on the physical part, working on the emotional part, and working on the mental part. I wouldn't say, like some people say, well, what about the spiritual part? I wouldn't say that that's separate. I kind of think of the physical, the emotional, and the mental are all inside the spiritual. So it's not that there's physical, emotional, mental, and the spiritual body. It's like you are a spiritual body, and then you have physical, emotional, and mental inside of you. Like everything exists inside of consciousness, right? Like consciousness doesn't exist inside of things. Everything exists there's nothing that exists outside of consciousness, right? So in terms of how we like unravel or heal the mind, it's often that the ego component that we have is the wounds that we have. It's the unhealed wounds, the unhealed traumas, often from childhood, that we carry forward. And so a lot of the negative thinking, because the negative thinking part and unraveling that negative thinking is often from our wounding, right? Where there's no one as hard on us as we are on ourselves. Isn't that true? Like we can be so hard on ourselves, so like mean to ourselves. And you could even do like, you could work with people and you could say, I want you to list all the things that you love, right? So you start listing all the things that you love and you wait to see how long it is before they mention themselves, right? And you could go a long time and the person is talking about all the things that they love, and they might not get to the place where they're like, I also love myself. And that's quite an insight when you think about it. Like, just bringing it home to us here right now, like when you think of all the things that you love, how long would it be before you would say, I also love myself, right? Like, why is that so distant or so far away? Why is that not like integrated in a way that is just like a given, right? Like it's more elusive. It's more like, one of the big I mentioned there's three kind of parts of the healing. There's healing the physical, healing the emotional, healing the mental. The whole thing is spiritual. And in terms of like healing, sometimes we have to heal those three different components, the physical, emotional, the mental, because if not, the problems come back again. So if you only treat the physical and the trauma is still at an emotional level or mental level, it's just going to repeat back into the body again. So the three components, the physical and emotional and mental, are all part of the biofield, the bioelectromagnetic field of the body. And the one best way to understand the biofield is that it's the blueprint for the body. It's the mold of how the body functions. It's where we carry memory, right? So we carry a lot of memory, like not in the cells inside your brain. It's not like you cut the cells open and find someone's phone number. Oh, there's Mary's phone number. Like you cut your brain open, you're not going to find any like data, any information. Like it's stored, it's held on an electromagnetic level. It's stored in the field of energy, that field of possibility, where that quantum field, right? You can't quite grasp it, but everything exists in that quantum field. So here we have like things happen us, we get wounded, maybe from childhood or from events that's happened, broken relationships, jobs, bad neighbors, difficult situations that we find ourselves in, and we get wounded, and that those wounds then become like an auto response, right? And that's where, when we kind of break down the ego side, a way of saying it is the ego is our defensiveness, right? So it's where we store our, like, there's core wounds that we carry. And I found through workshops, through sessions, through thousands of sessions and workshops and traveling and working with people, that you can bring all people's wounds back to the same thing. Like when you go deep enough with anybody's wounds, it all comes back to the same thing of lack of self-love, not loving oneself, right? And it sounds so simple and so straightforward, but everybody's wounding comes back to the same thing. We're not receiving ourselves. We're not loving ourselves. And so, and I've mentioned this before, it's not a new concept, right? But I always like to bring things back around again, because sometimes we need to hear them multiple times before they sink in, to integrate it, to get it into your body, that it's not just a mental concept, and so it's one of the things with, like, we live in a world which is very mentally heavy, which is all about, we think about everything. We're thinking or we're doing. We're like, it's very action, or we're always either doing or we're thinking. There's always something. It's very hard for a lot of people just to sit still and be at peace, and so a practice that I would give people, not to every client that came in, but with some clients that will come in, I would give them a practice, like after I do the healing with them and they're going to come in the next week. The practice during the week was to sit down for 15 minutes every day and do nothing. And to me, that's really easy. I'm really good at that. But it's amazing how difficult that is for some people, to be able to sit still. And they're like, well, what do you mean to do nothing? And I mean to do nothing, just to be with yourself for 15 minutes. And that can be really hard for people. And so I don't think that, I don't think that people get ill or they get sick out of nowhere, right? I think that if you're able to, like, slow down and tune in and listen to your body and listen to your mind and listen to your heart and listen to what you're saying to yourself, listen to how you communicate to yourself, how you resonate with yourself, because you spend more time with you than anybody else does, right? People say, oh, get rid of the negative people in your life. Well, there might not be very many people left if you get rid of them, right? Like, you have to start cutting a lot of people out. But I mean, what happens when a negative person is you? What happens when you're the one who's dramatic, when you're the one who dramatizes everything? And what happens if every one of us is like that, but we don't know it? We see it for other people, but when it comes to our drama and how we dramatize things, we have a blind spot. So other people can see our stuff and we can see other people's stuff, but no one can see their own stuff, right? And that's part of why, like, in healing and self-growth and self-development and personal growth and personal development, it's great to do work by yourself, but it's also really beautiful to do group work, because you get to discover parts of yourself that you just can't get to discover on your own, And so or at least, you know, you could say if you were to sit in a dark room, so you do like a it's called like a blackout room, so there's no light whatsoever and there's no sound and you're just in a pure black room, and you do that for 12 days, you're going to get in touch with yourself. It's like when you remove all the distractions, you're going to find out what your dramas are. You're going to have to listen to your own mind going crazy. You know, you're going to have to sit with yourself and be with yourself and confront all those parts of yourself. And sometimes I think, like, you know, when people get ill or they get sick, it's really their body coming back on themselves, and they're having to confront unhealed issues, unhealed trauma, unhealed wounds, right? It's being like mirrored or reflected back to them, because your body is like a canvas, right? You know, so it's your, how can I say it? It's your artwork. It's your creativity expressed, reflected back to you, you know. And so your body is your artwork. And so you've got to look at your art and say, do I even like this art? You know, do I like this? And that's a very interesting question, because some people don't like their own body, you know. And then it's like, well, if you don't even like your own body, how is your body supposed to be vibrating in good health and well-being when you don't even like yourself, right? And so, I mean, that's a good place as any to start with healing, is just starting to like yourself, starting to love yourself. It's really the core of all healing, but it's also a great place to start with healing, you know. And so one of the things I often say is, like, you know, moving from this auto response, this like beating ourselves up or negating ourselves or putting ourselves down, you know, sometimes we don't realize how much we're doing that. We're just in that auto response, and even to the point where we pull other people into it. So it's like you could have do a situation where when you're around certain people, you put yourself down, because without realizing it, they pick you up. So you put yourself down, they pick you up. And it's like you create this environment for people to keep lifting you up. So you're putting yourself down, other people are picking you up, and there's an exchange of energy that you're getting. That, like, there's a manipulation around that, right? And I remember this is years ago. I think it was my first year in bioenergy, and I was with this friend, and he was an older guy than me, and he said, I forget what it even was, but it was something about, like, I had put myself down. I said, oh, I had to do a talk, and it was in front of people, and I had put myself down about, like, oh, I don't want to talk in front of a group of people, and he said, stop. And I was kind of taken back. I was like, what? And he's like, stop. And I'm like, stop what? And he's like, stop playing the victim. You know, and I was like, I'm not playing the victim. And he's like, yes, you are. And it was like, I don't know, he just held me accountable for a moment. And I was like, oh my God, I totally am. I'm totally putting myself down, and I'm not even aware that I'm doing it. And everyone else will pick me up, but because you didn't and you reflected it back to me, now I saw it. And that's the power of working together with people, is you can sit in a dark room for 12 days, discover that by yourself. But if you're with the right person, vibing with a good friend or a healer, you say something and they reflect it back to you, you can sometimes unravel something instantly. You get that instant aha, that instant awakening, that instant realization, you know. It brings it into self-realization. And there's something about when you realize something, you can't unrealize it, right? When you see something, you can't unsee it, you know. And I think that's one of the beautiful things about healing, is that when you start to see your patterns, you can't unsee them. And that's, you know, there's 7 major chakras in the body, as well as some other chakras that I would say, I always say to people, like, focus on the 7 main chakras of your body. You know, some of the bioenergy practitioners will nod their head with that. You know, I've always said, like, folks, if you can focus on the 7 main chakras, you're doing well. At the same time, it's like, energies are shifting on the planet, energies are opening up, and our upper chakras are actually being really activated right now. So if you're feeling like a lot of buzzing around your head or ringing in your ear, mostly the left ear, but if you're feeling like buzzing and tingling and stuff, it's because these upper energies are being like switched on right now. We're like being blasted with increased energy that's opening up our energy system. And so just by a show of hands, has anybody felt that, like felt more activity or energy around their face, their head, their ears, maybe even feeling more sensations in your hands, sensations running through your spine or your feet? Yeah, wow, that's almost everyone. Yeah, and this is part of this huge like transformation the world is going through right now, right? Like we're going through this huge transformation. And as we're transitioning, moving through this transformation, I think part of this, like, part of this idea, like get out of your drama, is that we're actually dissolving and helping to release the egoic wounds that we have been carrying for generations. That's what's up for healing right now. Like there's different things have their turn for healing. And one of the things that's up for healing right now on our planet at this time for all of us is the dissolving of the ego. Now, what does that mean? It's the dissolving of our wounding, the dissolving of our pain and our suffering, And as we start to dissolve that pain and we start to dissolve that suffering, it's like the wounds, you can call them triggers, triggers come up. And when you get triggered, we say that's your wounding, right? That's the ego. So whenever you're like feel activated or triggered by something that someone says, I'm sure I can find something to say to you tonight to trigger you, right? It's usually not that hard you can have a group of people. It's not that hard to say something, to trigger people. I do it all the time in groups, but it's like, you can trigger people just to activate their wounding and then help them heal it, help them release it. And you see, like over time, when you can say something to someone and they're not triggered and they're able to just still be in peace, that the healing has taken place, right? So they're moving out of that auto response, which is really a reaction. So we have this autopilot, we're on autopilot, but on the autopilot, we also have an auto response, which is a reaction. And so we can be very reactionary. And I think we see that in the world right now, don't we? We see like people are very reactionary. You can't say this, you can't say that. Everything is so reactionary right now. Well, I don't know that that's going to like suddenly change or transform or get better. What the reactionary is, I'm going to just share my thought on it, is when you do the work on yourself, you're not as reactionary. Like you're more sitting in peace, like the more work you're doing. And for a lot of people who have, maybe for you guys who are on the call and who are interested in this kind of work, you've read the books, you've gone to the workshops, you've been working on yourself, and you've been dissolving those wounds. But for people who haven't been doing the work on themselves, as the energies continue to increase, because we're in this massive polarity shift that's taking place, you're going to find that everything is going to be amplified, right? So everything is getting increased and amplified. So if you have unresolved wounds in you, it's like you can't keep them hidden anymore, right? The shadow is being exposed. We see it, like I've mentioned this before, but we see it in the corporations and the governments and banking system, like all the stuff is food industry, pharmaceutical industry, all the corruption is coming out and being exposed. Well, the same thing is happening on a microcosm with individuals, that people's own shadow, their own wounding, you can't hide it, you can't suppress it. It's like, it's amplifying. And part of that is like humanity is purging itself, you know, and this is all part of our next stage of evolution. This is our evolutionary process. And the best way I can put it is, we're friggin' amazing full fractal light beings. And we're carrying so much drama in our biofields, so much wounding and so much drama and so much suffering. And rightly so, because we've been through a lot, right? We didn't know when we were signing up for Earth that it was going to be a roller coaster ride, right? Like, it's, you know, I sometimes think before we're born, we get this opportunity to come to Earth, and we're told, look, in order for you to come to Earth, you're going to experience life like a carnival. There's going to be ups and downs, highs and lows, good and bad, right, wrong. You're going to have the most crazy experiences. And it's like going to the circus and the carnival and all the things put together, romance and murder and all the things squashed into one place. And it's going to be really fast. It's going to be like a blip, you know. And do you want to go? And you're like, well, let me think about it, you know. And God is up there, and God is like, well, you know, as soon as you're born, you're going to forget everything. You're going to forget that you're a friggin' powerful spiritual being. You're going to forget that you're full fractal light consciousness, you know. And when you're born, you're going to be born into wounding and suffering. And you're like, oh, I'm not sure, like, I fancy that roller coaster ride. Like, that sounds a bit dodgy to me, you know. It's like, you know, talk about the fear factor. And it's like, yeah, but it won't last for long, but it'll be, if nothing else, it's going to be exhilarating, you know. And it's like, and then we're like, okay, well, let's do it. And then we're born in, and we're in it. We're in it to win it, folks. We're in it. Like, the moment we're here, we forget all of it. We forget everything. And we get caught up in the drama. Right? And nothing is more dramatic than your local news. Nothing is more dramatic than politics, you know, medicine, the banking, all of it. Like, it's so dramatic, crazy, you know. And that's not to mention our own lives and our own stuff that we've got to deal with and process, and, you know, and just try to keep up, right? Like, you know, when I say encourage people to sit down and just breathe and do nothing, it's like, it's really hard for people to do nothing, because we're continuously conditioned to be moving, to be doing, to be achieving accolades and qualifications. And, you know, your life has to mean something, and you have to have a purpose. And, you know, there's this continuous push. You can't just be still. What if being alive is enough? Whew. Boom. What if being alive is enough? You know, would you like the solution to stress? Would you like the cure for stress in an instant? Now, I know I've mentioned before that the answer was go and live in Maui. That's not what I want to share tonight. But some people are like, Maui, you know, like, that's definitely one of the answers, right? There's no stress in Maui, right? Maui's beautiful. But for the rest of us who maybe aren't living there, the reason we stress, right? You want to know the real reason we stress? And the real reason we stress is because we're not in the present moment. That's the only reason we stress, because we're not in the present moment. And when we're not in the present moment, we're literally declaring that the future, the past, is more significant than reality right now. That a memory or an idea, a thought, is more important than what's actually taking place in this experience right now. And two of the big things that I've treated people for, anxiety and depression, you know, you can bring that back to thinking. Like, literally, you can bring it back. People are always thinking about the future. People are always worrying about the future. They tend to suffer with anxiety. And if people are always thinking about the past, people are always worrying about the past and stuff that happened and their regrets and their grief. People that worry a lot about or think a lot about the past, they tend to suffer with depression, right? So depression, we're in the past, anxiety, we're in the future, and guess where peace is, right? Boom, right here, right now. You don't have to do anything. You don't have to go anywhere. It's right here, you know? I mentioned in one of the talks, I was working on this lady, and at the end of the session, she was just like in absolute bliss. And she was like, didn't have words. And she was like, after she came around, she's like, Michael, I haven't felt this way since I was in an ashram in India 20 years ago. And I just, you know, I looked at her and I breathed with her and I said to her, look, that place is here. It's inside of you. You know, it's also in an ashram in India, but it's also right here, right now inside of you. You don't have to go anywhere. You don't have to do anything. You don't have to achieve anything in order to find peace. But where are you going to find it? Only in the now, only in the here, only in the breath, right? When we forget to breathe, right? So we forget to breathe, so we come back and we breathe, right? And we breathe into the present, and we breathe into the present as reality, you know? This is the reality. And when we forget that, you know, sometimes like for someone who's worked with so much illness over so many years, I think that illness is a way to bring people back to their body. Illness brings you back to the carnival, back to the we start forgetting what's important, you know. You forget what's important. You start thinking, you think money's important, you think work is important, you know. There's no one on their deathbed that says, I wish I would have worked more, right? No one's on their deathbed saying, you know, in a study that was done on CEOs of Fortune 500 companies, they interviewed 500 Fortune 500 company people, you know, over, I think it was over 20 years, who were on their deathbed. And they asked them, you know, if they had any advice, what would their advice? And not one of them said they wish they would have worked more. Every one of them said they wish they would have spent more time with their family, with their friends, with the social element. And that's really significant, right? Like there's something meaningful in that, right? Like that, these simple connections, right? And in bioenergy, we say there's 3 relationships. There's, you know, the first relationship is about coming back into right relationship with yourself, right? So we come back into right relationship, and that we say that right relationship is the consciousness, right? So we're coming back into conscious relationship with the self. We call it the vertical flow of energy in bioenergy. And when we come back into that vertical flow, that we turn on what we call in bioenergy the internet, not to be confused with the internet, but the internet. So we turn on the vertical flow of energy and we open up our internet. And when we open up the internet, we're starting to connect now with nature, which is, you know, it's like when you're out in nature, you might not have a Wi-Fi signal, but there's a much stronger connection. You know, there's this deep connection with nature, with the trees, the plants, the sun, the water, the beach, right? There's this powerful connection that we have with nature. So our first connection is this vertical connection to ourselves, and then that opens out into our connection with nature, with Mother Gaia, with the earth, and with the solar system. So that's our cosmic energy and our Earth's energy, and they form our biofield, right? Our toroidal field around the body. And so that's the that's our flow of energy. Our free flowing energy is our free energy. We have free energy available to us. We don't need to get energy from each other, and we don't, we're not even getting energy from half the food we're eating, because like so much of the food is toxic and poisonous. So when we come back to like eating real food and healthy food, and we come back to connecting with the vertical flow, we actually don't need to eat as much food as we think that we need to eat. One of the biggest pandemics in the world is actually obesity. The second one is diabetes, right? It's like, we're overeating, right? Because we're not getting nutrition. We're not feeling satisfied. But I mean, think about it, right? Like, why do people overeat, right? Because it sounds very simple, but it's like maybe they're not happy inside, right? Maybe they're not connected inside. And so we eat to try to give ourselves something that is missing, right? So why do we overachieve? Well, to give ourselves something that's missing. Why do we overdo things, overaccomplish, all of that, to give ourselves something that's missing, right? Like if we're missing acknowledgement, if we're missing love, then we overachieve in order to try to get acknowledgement, maybe from your parents or from your boss in work, or someone that you feel like is someone that you feel like you would value how they see you. And so you're trying to meet how they see you. But really a lot of that stems from you not seeing you, right? You not connecting and really seeing the you, right? So that 3 relationships, the first relationship is to the self, the second relationship is with nature, and then the third relationship is with each other. And when the first relationship is in harmony, we're naturally in harmony with nature. And when we're in harmony with nature, we're also naturally then in harmony with each other. And we don't have to, the dissolving of the ego is we're not having to do things in order to get other people's approval, in order to get something that's missing inside of us. And so you imagine then if when we come deep into our healing and we return to love inside ourselves, not a selfish kind of love of like, oh, it's all about me, but it's like just a love where you actually love yourself, where you feel you're enough, right? Where you're on that list of things that you love. You're in there as like, you actually love yourself, right? And if you're in an unhealthy relationship, that you love yourself enough to get out of it. There's people who don't love themselves enough to get out of a relationship that is really unhealthy, right? There's people in jobs that are staying in jobs that they hate. Now I think it's fine to work at a job. You don't have to love your work. You don't have to love your work. That's why it's called work, right? Otherwise it'd be called sex. But or maybe you're a sex worker and you love that, who knows? But in any case, right? Like, you may as well laugh now. The jokes don't get any better. But in terms of like, as we return to love inside ourselves, and we all deserve more love, not less, right? Like all of us deserve more love, right? And as we return to more love inside ourselves, and we don't have to chase or do it out of the wounding, then we find like that you get to follow your joy. You're doing things then because you want to do them. You're being of service because you want to be, not because you have to be, right? And that's a really beautiful thing. It's a beautiful thing to realize you don't have to do something, but you want to do it. Oh, that right there is so beautiful. And that's when we're getting off that egoic treadmill of like, I've got to do it. I got it. And we get off that and we're like, okay, I don't have to do certain things, but what do I want to do? And then when we act from those places where we actually want to, it tends to be, this is my experience, when we're acting from that place of alignment, it tends never to harm anybody else. It tends only to support others, you know. So when we're acting from our highest light, it tends to be supportive and loving towards others and towards nature. And I think if we love ourselves, we're not destroying nature, we're not harming nature. You know, it's like nature is a reflection of how we're treating ourselves, right? Like if we're, and that's a different, like I think the climate and taking care of our environment are two very different things. I think that they've been put together, and I think they're two quite separate things. You know, it's an absolute given that we need to take care of our environment, right? But as we come back to this idea of unraveling the dramas, unraveling the stories. Well, one of the places where we carry a lot of our wounds, if we're to pick these 7 chakras, where when the chakras are open and flowing, we tend to be healthy and well. But when the chakra gets blocked, that's where we're carrying our wounding. Well, you can carry wounding in any of the 7 main chakras. But one of the ones that I speak to a lot in the bioenergy training is the solar plexus chakra, because it's the power center, it's the fire center. And it's one of the ones where when people are chronically ill, it's the one chakra that is always blocked. You know, with some illnesses and some conditions, people might have a blockage in one area, but not have a blockage in another area. But when it comes to chronic illness, there's always one chakra that is always blocked. And it's always the solar plexus. Boom. And it's the power center. And in some way, people have lost their power, right? They've lost their capacity and their ability to reclaim their health, you know. And I always think, like, you know, healing definitely begins in the mind. It begins in your intention. I think last week we talked about intention deficit disorder, right? Like, not having an intention for your health. Like if you're not choosing to be healthy, right, then by default, you're going to get whatever the world gives you, right? Like if you're not deliberately choosing health and well-being, if you're not choosing to healthy patterns and healthy things for yourself, the world is going to fill you up with whatever path you walk into. And so as we take ourselves off this auto response and we start to initiate, which is like coming into our consciousness, and we initiate intent, we start to direct our vibration, which is like a tuning fork. You start to vibrate the tuning fork. And when you have this intent, my intent is to be healthy, to be well, to be full of energy, full of vitality. Like when you put that intent out into the world, regardless of what's going on in your body, in your mind, and your emotions, when you put that intent out, the universe, in its magical wisdom, because you are also the universe, it's the greater part of you reflected back to you, the universe in its magnificence and in its wisdom will bring opportunity after opportunity to you to give you what it is that you're saying that you want. You know, so when you say my intent is to be healthy, you know, literally the opportunity, someone will come and say, hey, do you want to go for a walk? Or hey, do you want to get this healthy meal? You know, it's, you know, someone will ask you this instead of that. Like literally the vibrational frequencies that are coming into your field, they start to change like a tuning fork to match the very intent that you put out into the world. And it's subtle. It's so subtle that people don't even see it. Like literally your observation of the world is changing how the world reflects itself to you. The very electrons that emanate out into the world, that vibrate as electronic frequencies. So they vibrate as waves or particles. Waves is the potentiality for something to become something, and the particles are the fixed things, right? And when we perceive, when we intend, we start to perceive the world in a certain way, and then the world starts to reflect those intentions back to us. And so if we're always focused on drama, if we're always focused on illness and sickness and the world is fucked up, and we're always focused on, you know, I think it's really good to be able to like speak about, you know, stuff that's happening in the world, but then not to give it like all your attention. Like, you know, speak about it. It's fine to communicate. Like we need to be able to speak and communicate. You want to be able to speak about your illness and sickness and share it, right? That's a given, but you don't want to stay focused on it for all of your energy and all of your time. And that's what a lot of people do. It's they're not just expressing something in their life, but they stay focused on it, stay communicating it. They stay in that auto response, you know, repeating the same patterns, repeating the same conditioning. Does that make sense? So conscious communication, I think part of that is we have to slow down, right? One of the reasons I say to people, like, sit down and do nothing for 15 minutes, right? Part of that is just to slow people down, right? We're moving so fast that we're on autopilot. So it's like slowing people down to come back to the now. The now is here, right? It's today. Can you believe it's today, right? It's here. It's finally, it arrived. It's here. Boom. You know, some people think it's coming tomorrow, that the now moment is coming tomorrow. It'll be here tomorrow. You know, I'm going to do it then. I'm going to get into the present moment tomorrow. You know, so is eluding us, escaping us, evading us, right? And so we're moving so fast that even our breathing is on autopilot. We're not even breathing consciously, right? And that's by design, folks, right? Think about it. If breathing was up to you, we'd be dead, right? Well, no, I don't have time to breathe today, but maybe tomorrow. Oh, no, I can't tomorrow. Maybe Monday. No, I got a thing on Monday. Tuesday, I'm going to breathe out. Right? You'd be dead, right? You don't have time to fit it into your schedule. So breathing it's automated, right? You're just breathing unconsciously all the time. You're not even aware that you're breathing. You know, sometimes you have to catch your breath. Does that ever happen? You're like, oh, and you're like, oh, I forgot to breathe for a moment. And then you have to breathe to catch up. Everybody's yawning now. Look, it's contagious. Oh, it literally is contagious. Right? But it's like you're just going through the motions, right? Like everything else, you're just breathing, right? Just breathing, going through the motions. It's like you're breathing without breathing. You're just doing it on autopilot, right? Oh, but what happens when we come off autopilot? What happens? How do we get off autopilot? We got to slow down, you know. And that's I always think that's what healing is, you know, when you decide, oh, I'm going to go for an appointment with a practitioner. I'm going to take the weekend to do a workshop. I'm going to take a week off and go to a retreat. Basically, what you're doing is you're giving yourself permission to slow down. Maybe to take time off work. You know, like sometimes people say to me, oh, Michael, can you do a session? I'm working till 5. Can you do a session after 5? And I'm like, no, take the time off work. And they're like, oh, I didn't think of that. I just thought I'd come after. I'm like, no, interrupt your schedule, interrupt your program. And they're like, can I do that? I'm like, yeah, you say I'm taking the time off work, you know. And we're like, it sounds really like silly, but it's like, I'm not joking with you. It's like people are so caught up in, you know, I can only do the healing at this time, right? Like I can only do it in this way. And it's like, no, you got to interrupt. That's what you're interrupting. You're interrupting all of that conditioning and programming, that you have to receive it in a certain way, that it has to meet your egoic needs. No, you gotta dissolve yourself. You gotta get yourself out of the way. You gotta create the space. People come into healing and they try to demand healing. I paid the money, give me the healing. I only have an hour and then I gotta get back to work. Can you hurry up? I don't know, nature will humble you when you do that and you demand, healers are just a conduit, right? Where it's just like the musician. The musician has the instrument and they start playing and the music flows through them. And it's if you ever see that, where you see the musician who, it's like they're not even playing, it's just flowing through them. Isn't it the most beautiful thing? You see a dancer, you see someone dancing, and they're so embodied it that it's not even them dancing, it's like spirit is moving through them. Whether that's music, whether that's poetry, whether that's dance, whether that's theater, whatever it might be, healing works in the same way. Healing comes through us. We've got all these amazing techniques to gather up the blockages, draw them out, release the blockages, to work on people. But there's something, when we come to the energy and we humble ourselves, the energy does more than what we're able to do by ourselves. Nature moves through us. Nature moves our hands like it moves the musician, or it moves the artist. It moves the artist, the brush. And at the end of the painting, the artist is like, wow, where did that come from? And sometimes healing is like that the healing moves through you and it just dissolves the wounding of the person. It just dissolves their pain. Like physical pain gets dissolved, emotional pain gets dissolved, all of this negative thinking gets dissolved. When people humble themselves, when people create, when they slow down, when they create space to receive. 30 years of doing healing sessions, and you can see when people come in the door, you can tell literally how people will heal by how they walk in. You get to see the patterns. You get to see people's patterns. You get to see, okay, I can tell with this person that they're not going to heal because of how they approach things. And so I'm like, okay, if I do what everyone else has done, they're not going to get any improvement. So now I need to interrupt their program, because they're going to approach their healing the way they've done it 100 times before, and they're going to get the same non-results. So now I need to interrupt their program. We need to interrupt the drama. We need to interrupt the, God, I've gone everywhere and I've tried everything and nothing works. So many people come, I've done so much healing and nothing works. It's not that healing doesn't work, it's that we don't work, right? It's us. It's us. It's that we don't work. We're in the way, right? And people are like, oh, but I tried so much. It doesn't matter how many things you try if you're not working. If the problem is you, if the problem is you, it doesn't matter how many different things you do, right? Unless the person who's helping you can see that you are the problem in your life. If they agree with you that the problem is outside of you, you're never going to get better. I'm sorry. It just doesn't, it's like people can make you feel good. Like if someone agrees with you, hey, really it's my family is really my problems, that's what, and a person agrees with you and you're like, oh yeah, they reassure you and they, great, right? You feel good about that, but you're not going to heal it. We have to unravel, we have to go into the wounds and unravel those triggers, unravel the ego, the past stories that we've told ourselves. And the way part of that is like slowing down, creating space, opening up that space where we can touch those those parts that are sensitive, right? Where we get to breathe in, like, you know, just as the bioenergy healer is clearing the blockages out of your heart chakra and your solar plexus chakra and your brow chakra and your sacral chakra and your root chakra and your throat chakra and your crown chakra, just as they're clearing the blocks out of the way, you start getting vulnerable in those areas, right? And the reason you get vulnerable during healing is because your defenses are coming down. Your wall, your defense mechanism, right? Vulnerability is opening up because your wall is coming down. And that it's a really beautiful thing, because when someone lets you in, when someone drops the wall down, the guard down, the protective mechanism, when all of that starts to dissolve and people open up, not only do they open up and let healing in, but what is healing? Healing is love. Healing is love. So really, when we let our defensiveness down, we're actually opening up to receiving more love, not less. And so healing is when we receive, we fully love the parts of ourselves that we have blamed and shamed and dishonored, you know, and you know, we literally dramatize our own stories, right? Like, you know, no one can blame us of stuff as much as we do to ourselves. No one can tell us how guilty we are as much as we dramatize that on ourselves. You know, no one can make you feel guilt and shame and blame as much as you do to you, right? It's like you got to break, you know, last week, we did spontaneous healing webinar last week, but before that, we did a webinar called You Need to Break Up with Yourself, right? And that was on the same kind of idea. You got to break up with the part of yourself that keeps putting yourself down, right? But in terms of like moving from this auto response to moving to the consciousness, we want to slow down. We want to pause. We want to feel. We want to open up. We want to create the space for healing, right? And I mentioned too, like, I feel like the world is, the energies are increasing, the polarities are increasing. You might notice that, right? Like that, the polarity of the world, we call it the North Pole and the South Pole, but the energies, some people say that even the poles are shifting, like the energy, the internal energy of the planet is shifting. Scientists are saying like that there's this energy, there's this shift that's taking place. I mean, it's hard to even get your head around. What does that mean? You know, like, but in terms of like when we tune in and we feel into our intuition, I think we can all accept that the world is going through a big transformation, right? I think we can all accept that. And I think as we tune in and we feel in, we can also maybe notice that any of the unresolved stuff that we have, we've been purging over these last 3 years. We've been dissolving and purging so much of our wounding, our conditioning, our programming. We've been purging so much. And almost like to give yourself a little like, well done, you know, we're still here, you know. I mean, there's a great book called Don't Sweat the small stuff, or don't sweat the big stuff. But it's kind of like, I think everything is in the title, right? Like, so if it's don't sweat the big stuff, it's kind of like, well, don't sweat the big stuff, because the biggest stuff is you die and then there's nothing to worry about, right? Like if you're dead, well, you don't have any problems if you're dead. There's not really much to worry about. And then like, don't sweat the small stuff. Well, you know, if it doesn't kill you, what are you really that worried about it? Like we worry way too much about shit that never happens. We worry way too much. Like worry can dominate our thinking about things that never happen, right? So, you know, again, and that worry can lead to anxiety, right? Because we're worrying too much about things that happen. We literally create anxiousness. We take ourselves out of the present moment. we're breathing unconsciously with that. And now we're shifting our natural immunity from the balanced, this symbiotic relationship, say, of the sympathetic nervous system and the parasympathetic nervous system, how they work together in harmony, and they flow on the in-breath and the out-breath, they harmonize with each other. But when we stop our breathing and we pause our breath during stress, when we so something happens and we stop breathing, well, that's the fight, flight, freeze, right? We're freezing ourselves. When we're not breathing consciously and we're on that autopilot, we don't even know that we stopped breathing, then that process is we're trapping ourselves in our nervous system. We're trapping it into more of a sympathetic state. And so as the nervous system gets trapped in that more sympathetic state, we're like overusing the adrenals, and then people reach this like adrenal fatigue. They're tired all the time, and it's because they're in a stress state. So we come back to like what we said earlier. One of the solutions to stress is to be in the present moment. Literally, it's the solution. Other than live in Maui, it's the solution to stress is to be present. One of the ways to be present is to breathe, to take yourself off that autopilot and just breathe consciously for a little bit, And one of the ways to release and purge all of this nonsense, absolute nonsense that we carry inside, the victimhood, the wounding, the traumas, is that we actually have to take time and space to honor them, right? Like even your victimhood needs to be there. Like where sometimes we play the victim and from our wounding, and it's just like we also have to honor that. We have to honor that the wounding that we have has brought us to that point, that part of us needs to be healed, and to be able to take the time and the space to acknowledge it, to feel it, to release it. I often think like healing is not really releasing anything. It's about integrating everything. It's about integration. It's not that you get rid of anything. You just get to integrate it. So now the wound comes up again. And the reason you know that you've been healed is because the wound comes up and you're not triggered. It's not that you get rid of the wound. It's not that you get rid of, like, even if you get, to be honest, even if you get rid of people in your life, you're going to have new people come into your life with the same problems, right? So anything that's unresolved, like circles around again, right? So I often think it's not that things stop coming into, like sometimes people think, oh, I don't want to have any duality. I just want to exist in this like one energy, God, love, light, whatever it is. I don't think it's that we exist outside of duality. Like duality is always there, right? So people are like, I want to stop the duality. I want to just be in the light. Duality is always there, but it's like, it's always going to be there. And the moment you accept that, then you stop fighting with it, right? So if you're fighting to get out of duality, if you're fighting not to be wounded, if you're fighting, like, I think one of the most beautiful things I teach with the solar plexus chakra, the power center, right? This fire center, is what happens. Are you ready for it? This is the golden nugget of golden nuggets. What happens when I stop fighting with the things that I think are fighting with me? Boom. What happens when I stop fighting with the things that I think are fighting with me? And that right there, that is the dissolving of the ego. When you realize that you're really just fighting with yourself. You're fighting with yourself, And then we shift from that unconscious response, auto response, and we start becoming more conscious of, how am I speaking? How am I interacting with the world? How is that being reflected back to me? And then from that place, you get to co-create. You get to, okay, what do I want to dream into existence? And we can dream beautiful dreams. What if we dreamt of like people being healthy and well, people loving themselves? What if we dreamt of governments that actually cared about the people and actually worked for the people? What if we dreamed of medical profession that actually cared about health and well-being over the corporate profit side, right? What if banks want to actually support and help people rather than exploiting people? Like, we get to dream into existence. And it begins with us. Like, what do you want to dream into service, into being, right? You get to dream. You get to, and the things that we see that cause us suffering, they're not to keep us in suffering. They're to get us to dream of a better way, a more beautiful way, right? And so in terms of like illness and sickness, I think when people get ill or sick, it's not in any way to punish them or harm them. It's simply to trigger off an opportunity to think and feel in a new way. There's no one appreciates health more than somebody who is sick, right? No one appreciates strength more than somebody who is weak, you know? So it's like when we think like we want to bring something into our life, the universe gives us opportunity to experience, to like these experiences, like the carnival. As I said, you get an opportunity to experience life in multiple different ways, not to punish you, not to hurt you, but to give you experiences, to give you an opportunity to unravel the nature of your being, right? Well, thank you for tuning in today. I hope there's some things here that you could take away from our talk today: the slowing down, the breathing, the connecting. Lillian says, I think it's don't sweat the small stuff, and it's all small stuff. That's right. Thank you. Thank you, Lillian, for sharing that. Don't sweat the small stuff, and it's all small stuff. Yeah, I mean, I never read the book, but I think it says it all in the title. Don't sweat the small stuff, and everything is the small stuff. Because I think, like, if it's big stuff, the big stuff is you're dead. And if you're dead, you don't need to worry about it. That's, at least that's what we say in Ireland, right? Like, you know, but we overthink and we over worry and we over all of that. And it's like, is a this is a beautiful opportunity for us to embrace, I think, our spiritual growth. I think, like, we're being invited to step off the roller coaster ride, to integrate the duality, to integrate the wounding, to transform our lineage, to awaken our consciousness, to open now into the upper chakras. We're being given this opportunity right now at this time in our lives that has never been available to all the ones who have gone before us. All our ancestors, all the people who have gone before us, they've done all the heavy work to get us to the place where we are now. And now we're doing a different level of work where we're freeing and opening up our consciousness, where we're freeing and liberating ourselves from suffering. Because I think our soul has one purpose. Our soul has one purpose, and it's to free us and liberate us from suffering. But it's not like, as it frees us and liberates us from our suffering, it doesn't mean that life is happy camp, right? Like, life doesn't make your life better by making everything easier, right? Sometimes life makes your life better by making things harder, right? I call that in level 2 in the practitioner training in bioenergy, we call that we say people are like tea bags, right? It's only when you dip them in hot water that you get to see what they're made of. right? The hot water brings out the flavor and the taste, and it brings out the what's inside that tea bag, right? And we're like that as people, like that. If we go through life and we don't have any experiences or any challenges, we never get to see what we're capable, what we're made of, right? You know, it's like yeah, just before I came on the call today, I'm like, I'm gonna be working with someone who, you know, got an infection in their leg, and the doctor told them they want to amputate the leg. You either amputate the leg or you're gonna die. You know, and it's like, you know, sometimes, like, no matter how challenging or difficult your life is, there's always someone going through something more challenging, more difficult, and not in any way to undervalue what you're going through, right? But I think that's pretty significant, to have an option: lose your leg or die. You know, and then, you know, as healers, sometimes we, you know, we come in to interrupt that program. What if the person could live and keep their leg? Option number 3, right? Option number 3. What if we can give people other options? What if we can think outside the box? What if the box doesn't exist for us? What if we're all of us are full fractal light beings, beyond time, beyond space, non-local events, and we're just bringing ourselves, closing ourselves into an experience, into this physical body at this time. So we're localizing ourselves to planet Earth, and we're localizing ourselves to the time, which is 2023, and we're bringing ourselves into this to have an experience and have an expression. But what if we remember that we're not just this physical body, but we're so much more than that? And as we start to access that other part of ourselves, and we start to think from that other place, from other options, from the multidimensional self, then there's a reality that exists, in which you're healthy, in which you're well, in which you're loved and supported. There's a reality that exists in which you fully love yourself. And as you start to observe that reality, as you start to intend that reality, you start to match up with that multidimensional part of yourself. Like a tuning fork, you start to bring that into your life. You start to resonate that into your life, right? Talking about non-time, I'm actually not keeping any track of the time, because I'm just in the flow, in the moment, just going with the flow. But we've gone a little bit over time. Don't worry, it's still free, no charge. But thank you for tuning in today. I hope that you have enjoyed our talk. I hope that you can take some things away with you. I'm going to stop recording, but for those who are tuning in on YouTube, after you watch it, please like, subscribe, let us know what you think, and join us next week for our next webinar.